The compass in Caleb Mercer's hand had stopped working exactly 14 years, 3 months and 12 days ago. He knew the precise count because he had marked every sunrise since the morning he found his wife and daughter holding each other in the ashes of their home. He stood now on a ridge overlooking the Montana wilderness, the December wind cutting through his buckskin coat like frozen knives. Below him, the town of Elkhorn sprawled in the valley, its buildings sending up thin columns of chimney smoke that disappeared into the gray winter sky. He had not been down there in 8 months. He did not want to go down there now. But a man needed supplies. A man needed salt and coffee and ammunition. A man needed to trade the furs he had collected through autumn and early winter, or else the pelts would rot and his labor would mean nothing. Caleb opened the compass one more time. The brass case was worn smooth from years of handling, the metal warm against his calloused palm despite the bitter cold. On the inside of the lid, an inscription had been engraved in elegant script that his wife Eleanor had chosen herself on their wedding day in 1869. So you will always find your way home. The needle inside spun lazily, first one direction, then another, never settling on any point. It had been doing that since the day Eleanor died. Some mechanical failure, perhaps. A broken spring or a demagnetized needle. He had never bothered to have it repaired because the malfunction seemed fitting somehow. He had lost his direction the same day the compass lost its north. He tucked the useless instrument back into his coat pocket and began the long descent toward Elkhorn. The trail down from the high country took most of the morning. Caleb moved through the pine forest with the automatic ease of a man who had spent more than a decade learning every rock and root and frozen stream in these mountains. His packhorse followed behind, laden with beaver pelts and wolf skins and the occasional fox fur that would bring good money from the traders in town. He was 48 years old, though his reflection in mountain streams told him he looked considerably older. His beard had gone almost entirely gray in the past few years, and the lines around his eyes had deepened into permanent furrows, carved by wind and grief in equal measure. His hands were scarred from countless encounters with traps and knives and the teeth of animals that did not want to be caught. Before the mountains, he had been someone else entirely. Caleb Mercer had been one of the most feared bounty hunters in the Western Territories. The federal marshals had called him the Ghost because of his ability to track men across impossible distances and bring them back for justice when no one else could find them. He had captured outlaws in 6 different states and territories. He had killed men when killing was necessary, and he had spared men when mercy seemed the better choice. And then Bloody Bill Hancock had happened. The memory tried to surface, as it always did when Caleb let his guard down. A burning homestead, smoke rising against a blue Nebraska sky, 2 bodies in the ruins, one large and one heartbreakingly small, wrapped around each other as if the mother had been trying to shield her daughter from flames that cared nothing for love or innocence. He had been 60 miles away when it happened, following orders, tracking a payroll thief while a madman burned his way across the territory. By the time Caleb received word and rode through 2 nights without stopping, there was nothing left but ashes and silence, and a grief so profound it had hollowed him out completely. Caleb pushed the memory away as he always did. The past was a country he no longer lived in. He had emigrated to a place of silence and solitude, and he intended to stay there until his heart finally stopped beating. The outskirts of Elkhorn appeared through the trees around midday. The town had changed since his last visit. A large lumber mill now dominated the eastern edge of the settlement, its smokestacks belching dark clouds into the winter air. A sign on the main gate announced that this was the Garrett Lumber Company. Caleb wondered vaguely who Garrett was and why he needed a mill this size in a town that barely had 300 residents. He guided his horses down Main Street, noting how the townspeople avoided meeting his eyes. This was normal. Mountain men who came down once or twice a year were regarded with a mixture of suspicion and pity by civilized folk. They thought he was crazy, probably. Living alone in the wilderness like some kind of hermit prophet, they were not entirely wrong. The general store was where it had always been, squeezed between a barber shop and a shuttered building that had once been a dress shop. Caleb tied his horses at the rail outside and pushed through the door, setting off a small bell that announced his arrival. The interior smelled of coffee and leather, and the underlying sweetness of stored grain. Shelves lined every wall, packed with goods that ranged from cooking pots to rifle ammunition to bolts of fabric in colors that Caleb had not seen in months. The sight of all this civilization made him feel slightly nauseated, like a man who had grown accustomed to darkness being thrust suddenly into bright sunlight. Silas Compton emerged from a back room, wiping his hands on an apron that had seen better decades. He was 62 years old, with a bald head that shone in the lamplight and eyes that darted nervously around the room before settling on his customer. "Mr. Mercer." Silas's voice carried a strange mixture of relief and anxiety that Caleb could not quite interpret. "It has been a while." 8 months, Caleb agreed. He began unloading the furs onto the counter, arranging them so that Silas could see the quality of his work. "Beaver mostly, some wolf, 3 foxes, including a silver one that should fetch a premium." Silas examined the pelts with hands that trembled slightly. His fingers traced the leather, testing the thickness and flexibility of Caleb's tanning work. "These are excellent, Mr. Mercer. Best I have seen this season. You always did do fine work. I will take my payment in supplies and the rest in cash." Silas nodded and began calculating, scratching figures on a scrap of paper with a pencil that needed sharpening. While he worked, Caleb noticed something peculiar about the way the shopkeeper kept glancing toward the front window. Every few seconds, his eyes would flick to the glass as if he expected something terrible to appear on the other side. "Is there a problem?" Caleb asked. Silas flinched at the question, his pencil skittering across the paper. "No, no problem. Everything is fine. Will you be staying the night in town, Mr. Mercer?" "I had not planned to." The relief that flooded Silas's face was so obvious that it bordered on insulting. "That is probably wise. The weather looks like it might turn. Best to get back to your mountains before the snow sets in." Caleb was about to respond when the screaming started. It came from somewhere down the street toward the lumber mill end of town. A woman's voice, high-pitched and ragged with terror. The sound carried clearly through the cold air, slicing through the comfortable quiet of the general store, like a blade through soft flesh. Caleb's entire body went still. His hands stopped moving on the furs he had been arranging. His breathing slowed to almost nothing. Every sense he possessed focused on that sound and what it might mean. The scream came again, and this time it was followed by the unmistakable noise of fist-striking flesh. Caleb turned toward the window. Through the frost-covered glass, he could see a man dragging a woman down the center of Main Street. The man was large, broad-shouldered, unsteady on his feet in a way that suggested alcohol even at this hour of the day. The woman was young, perhaps 29 years old, with dark hair that had come loose from its pins and hung in tangled strands around her face. She was also heavily pregnant. The man struck her again while Caleb watched. His fist connected with the side of her head, and she stumbled, and he grabbed her by the hair to keep her from falling. She wrapped both arms around her swollen belly, trying to protect the child inside, even as her own body absorbed the punishment. Caleb looked at the street around them. He saw a woman sweeping a porch who had stopped sweeping, but had not stopped looking at the ground. He saw 2 men loading a wagon who had found sudden fascination with their work. He saw a shopkeeper pulling down a window shade despite the early hour. He saw a child being hurried inside by a mother whose face was carefully, deliberately blank. The entire town was performing an elaborate dance of not seeing. Caleb had watched this dance before. He had danced it himself in another life, when duty and orders had mattered more than the quiet voice inside him that whispered something was wrong. That voice had cost him everything eventually. He had learned to ignore it until the day he came home to find his wife and daughter dead, while he had been 60 miles away following orders. The pregnant woman fell to her knees in the frozen mud of Main Street. The man stood over her, weaving slightly, probably still drunk from whatever he had been drinking since breakfast. He drew back his boot to kick. Caleb's feet were moving before his conscious mind gave them permission. He heard Silas shouting something behind him, felt the cold air bite his face as he pushed through the door, registered the way his boots crunched on frozen ground as he crossed the distance between the general store and the violence unfolding in the street. The man had just pulled back his leg when Caleb's voice cut through the winter air like a rifle shot. "That is enough." The man turned. He was somewhere in his mid-30s, with a heavy jaw and small eyes that struggled to focus on this stranger who had materialized from nowhere. His face was flushed red from cold and alcohol both. His clothes were expensive. the kind of fine wool and quality leather that only men with money wore in territories like this. "Who the hell are you?" "Step away from her!" The man laughed. It was an ugly sound, wet with phlegm and thick with contempt. He released the woman's hair, and she collapsed fully to the ground, curling around her belly like a wounded animal protecting its young from a predator it could not escape. "This is my wife," the man said. "My property under law, my business and nobody else's. Your business just became mine." The man took 2 unsteady steps toward Caleb, raising his fists in the clumsy guard of a brawler who had won too many fights against weaker opponents. "You picked the wrong day to play hero, old man." He swung. Caleb had been reading men's movements since before this drunk was born. He saw the telegraph in the shoulder, the weight shift in the hips, the overcommitment to power that left the man's midsection completely exposed. He stepped inside the punch, letting it whistle past his ear, and drove his own fist into the man's solar plexus with the precision of someone who knew exactly where to hit and exactly how hard. Air exploded from the man's lungs in a desperate rush. Before he could recover, Caleb's left hook caught him on the jaw, snapping his head sideways with a crack that echoed off the nearby buildings. The man's legs buckled beneath him, and he collapsed to the frozen ground like a sack of grain dropped from a wagon. The street went absolutely silent. Caleb stood over the unconscious man, breathing steadily, feeling the familiar calm that always came over him during moments of violence. It was not pleasure exactly. It was more like the absence of noise. When he was fighting, the ghost in his head went quiet, and he could think clearly for the first time in years. He turned to the woman. She was staring up at him with eyes that held too much pain to be merely physical. Her hands remained locked around her belly even though the immediate threat had passed. Blood trickled from her nose and had begun to crust on her upper lip. One side of her face was already swelling from the blows she had absorbed. "Are you hurt badly?" She opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. Her entire body was trembling, shaking with a violence that had nothing to do with the cold. Caleb recognized the signs of shock beginning to set in, the body's desperate attempt to protect the mind from trauma it could not process. He knelt slowly, making himself less threatening, bringing his face closer to her level. "Can you stand?" She nodded, but when she tried to rise, her legs refused to support her weight. Caleb caught her under the arms and lifted her with the careful strength he had learned from handling injured animals in the wilderness. She weighed almost nothing despite the pregnancy. He wondered when she had last eaten a proper meal. "Please." Her voice was barely more than a whisper, rough from screaming and thick with fear. "Please do not make it worse. He will kill you when he wakes up. He will kill me when you leave." Caleb looked down at the man's unconscious form, then back at the woman's terrified face. Something stirred in his memory that he had tried for years to bury. Eleanor's face, pale and fever bright in the days before he had left on his last assignment. Eleanor begging him to stay, to put family before duty just this once, just this one time. He had chosen duty, and she had died while he was being responsible and professional and obedient. "Then I will not leave." The woman's eyes went wide with something that might have been hope or might have been fresh terror. Before either of them could speak again, footsteps approached from behind. Caleb turned, keeping the woman supported with one arm, while his other hand dropped to the pistol at his hip. But it was only Silas Compton, his face a battlefield where fear and something that might have been buried hope were fighting for dominance. "Bring her to Dr. Hale," Silas said. His voice was barely steady, but the words came out clear. "And then, Mr. Mercer, you had better decide whether you are staying or running, because when Victor Garrett wakes up, this town is going to burn." Dr. Edmund Hale's office occupied a small building at the eastern end of Main Street, close enough to the lumber mill that the smell of sawdust mixed with the sharper sense of carbolic acid and medicinal alcohol. The doctor himself was 61 years old, with white hair retreating from a liver-spotted scalp and hands that had set 10,000 broken bones during a career that spanned 3 decades of frontier medicine. He took one look at the woman in Caleb's arms, and his face went gray as winter clouds. "Put her on the table. Carefully, for God's sake. Carefully." Caleb laid her down as gently as he had ever handled anything in his life. Her hands immediately returned to their protective position over her belly, As if even semi-conscious, she could not stop trying to shield her unborn child from a world that seemed determined to destroy them both. The doctor began his examination with practiced efficiency, movements that had been refined over decades of treating everything from gunshot wounds to childbed fever. He checked her pupils with a small lamp, felt along her ribs with knowing fingers, pressed gently at her abdomen while watching her face for signs of pain. Throughout the process, his own expression grew darker and more troubled. 3 cracked ribs, he announced finally, his voice carrying the clinical detachment that doctors learned to use as armor against horrors they could not prevent. Concussion from multiple blows to the head, extensive bruising across the torso and back that will take weeks to heal. He paused and his voice dropped lower. She is also severely malnourished. Has been for weeks, possibly months. I can count her ribs through her skin. How long has this been going on? Caleb asked. I would estimate 2 years, perhaps longer. The doctor stepped back from the table, removing his stethoscope. His eyes met Caleb's across the room, and the older man's face held a confession he clearly needed to make, words that had been building behind his teeth for too long. I tried to help her once, 2 years ago, when she first came to me with bruises that her husband had obviously inflicted. I examined her, documented everything, and filed a formal complaint with Sheriff Prescott. What happened? The next night, someone burned my clinic to the ground. 5 years of medical supplies, patient records, everything I had built, gone in a matter of hours. No one saw anything. No one heard anything. The fire was ruled accidental. And you stopped trying to help her. I rebuilt my practice, and I learned to look the other way. The doctor's voice cracked like ice on a spring river. I told myself it was better to have a doctor who could help some people than no doctor at all. I told myself that if I pushed too hard, Victor would kill her just to prove he could. I told myself she was alive at least. That had to count for something. You let her suffer. I let her live. The words came out harsh and broken. That is what I told myself anyway. Every time she showed up with new bruises, I treated her injuries and I kept my mouth shut, and I told myself I was keeping her alive. Better alive and beaten than dead and avenged. Caleb had heard similar logic before. During the war, he had known officers who looked away from atrocities because reporting them meant risking careers. After the war, he had met lawmen who ignored violence because stopping it was too dangerous. The world ran on such calculations, on the mathematics of moral cowardice. Good men doing nothing while evil flourished, telling themselves they were being practical. He had been one of those good men once. He had followed orders and done his duty, while his family waited at home for a protector who never came. And Eleanor and Maggie had died while he was being responsible and professional. Never again. How is the baby? He asked. The doctor placed his stethoscope against the woman's belly, moved it, listened intently. His expression shifted slightly, showing something that might have been surprise or might have been relief. The baby's heartbeat is strong, remarkably so, given everything. But if the abuse continues, she will almost certainly miscarry. This is her 3rd pregnancy, Mr. Mercer. She lost the first 2 when Victor beat her during the final months. The woman's eyes opened then. She had regained enough consciousness to hear the doctor's words, and a single tear tracked down her bruised face like a trail through dust. I need this baby, she whispered, her voice cracking on each word. Please, this is my only hope. Hope for what? Caleb asked gently. That something good can come from all this pain, that I can be a mother, that my child will grow up knowing that love exists, that violence is not normal, that the world can be beautiful. Her hand moved across her belly in a gesture that was both protective and tender. This baby is the only thing keeping me alive. Caleb felt something shift in his chest, a crack forming in walls he had spent more than a decade building. He had heard similar words before, spoken by another woman in another time. Eleanor, pregnant with Rose, talking about the kind of world she wanted to bring their daughter into. A world where women did not fear their husbands. A world where children did not hide from their fathers. Eleanor had believed such a world was possible. She had died before seeing it, but her hope had lived on in Rose, their daughter, who had inherited her mother's smile and her mother's faith in human goodness. Rose, who had been 4 years old when she died in her mother's arms, trying to escape flames set by a monster. The doctor pulled Caleb aside, keeping his voice low enough that the woman could not hear. You cannot stay here, Mr. Mercer. Victor Garrett has 8 men who handle his problems. They are not ordinary mill workers. They are criminals and killers he has collected over the years. Men who will do anything for money and have no conscience to trouble their sleep. Tell me about them. The worst is Marcus Stone. He stands over 6 feet tall, and they say he killed his own family in Nevada before coming here. He is Victor's primary enforcer. When someone defies Victor, Marcus makes them disappear. There are at least 3 men buried in the mountains who learned that lesson too late. And the sheriff? Wade Prescott takes Victor's money every month. Has for 3 years. He will not help you. No one in this town will help you. We are all too afraid. Then why are you telling me this? Because I am tired of being a coward. The doctor's eyes were wet, tears tracking down weathered cheeks. Because that woman deserves better than what this town has given her. And because you are the first person in 2 years who has had the spine to stand up to Victor Garrett. But spine alone will not stop bullets. I know. Leave tonight. Get back to your mountains while you still can. That is my medical advice. Caleb turned to look at the woman on the examination table. She was staring at the ceiling with empty eyes, one hand resting on her belly, tears running silently into her tangled hair. Broken. Alone. Exactly like Eleanor must have been during those final days when fever burned through the settlement, and Caleb was 60 miles away doing his duty. He could not save Eleanor. He could not save Rose. They were past tense now, fixed forever in the amber of history, beyond the reach of any rescue. But this woman was present tense. This baby was future tense. I am staying? The doctor's eyes widened with something between admiration and horror. You will die. Maybe. But I have spent 14 years dying slowly in those mountains anyway. At least this way, if death comes, it might mean something. Before the doctor could respond, the woman's hand shot out and gripped Caleb's wrist. Her strength surprised him, a desperate power that came from somewhere beyond physical capability. Mr. Mercer. Her eyes locked onto his face with an intensity that cut through her exhaustion. Before you make this decision, there is something you need to know. About the baby. Caleb waited. This child, she said, swallowing hard against words that clearly caused her pain, may not be Victor's. The room went very still. Even the fire in the stove seemed to quiet, as if the flames themselves were listening. The doctor turned away, giving them privacy in the only way he could. What do you mean? The woman's grip tightened on his wrist. 7 months ago, Victor went to Billings for 3 weeks, a timber contract negotiation. While he was gone, a man came through town, a merchant from St. Louis named Thomas. He sold kitchen implements and household goods from a wagon. She paused, and Caleb watched shame and defiance war across her bruised face. He was kind to me. He treated me like a person instead of property. He listened when I spoke. He looked at me like I was worth looking at, like I mattered. Another tear fell, tracking through the dried blood on her cheek. We found comfort in each other. For 3 weeks, I remembered what it felt like to be human. And then he left, and I never told him I might be carrying his child. Does your husband suspect? Victor has been counting the days since he learned I was pregnant. He is not stupid, whatever else he may be. If this baby comes too late, or if it looks nothing like him when it arrives, he will know for certain what he already suspects. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. And he will kill us both. Not because he wants the child, but because he cannot stand the idea of being made a fool. Where is this Thomas now? Gone. Continued west to Oregon Territory. I have no way to contact him, and even if I did, what would I say? Come back for a child that might not be yours, to face a husband who will kill you for touching what he considers his property. She looked at Caleb with desperate hope and absolute honesty fighting in her eyes. If you are truly going to help me, you need to know what you are protecting. I am not some innocent victim from a fairy tale, Mr. Mercer. I am an adulteress carrying another man's child while married to a monster. I sinned against my marriage vows because I was desperate for one moment of kindness in a life of endless pain. Caleb studied her face for a long moment. No judgment, just assessment. After the silence had stretched long enough to become meaningful, he spoke. What is your name? Nora. Nora Garrett. Well, Mrs. Garrett, I have killed men. I have watched good people die while bad people prospered. I have failed everyone I ever promised to protect, including my own wife and daughter. You finding a moment of kindness in a life of pain does not shock me. It does not disgust me. It makes you human. He gently removed her hand from his wrist and stood up. You rest now. I am going to figure out what comes next. But I want you to understand something. What? That baby, no matter who fathered it, deserves a chance to live. And as long as I am breathing, I am going to make sure it gets that chance. He left before she could respond, stepping out into the cold afternoon air, where the smell of sawdust and violence still hung like a curse over Elkhorn. Night fell over Elkhorn like a judgment. Caleb sat in the small room behind the livery stable that Silas had arranged for him, cleaning his rifle by lamplight while listening to the sounds of the town settling into uneasy sleep. Somewhere a dog barked at shadows. Somewhere a door slammed against the wind. Somewhere a man laughed, drunk and careless, unaware or uncaring of the violence that had happened on Main Street just hours before. The rifle was a Sharps, .50 caliber, the same weapon Caleb had carried during his years as a bounty hunter. He had killed men with this gun, soldiers, raiders, outlaws who thought they could outrun justice forever. The rifle did not care what it killed. It simply did what it was built to do. He wondered sometimes if he was any different. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Caleb set the rifle aside and drew his pistol, approaching the entrance from an angle that would give him cover if someone tried to shoot through the wood. Who is there? Silas Compton, and someone who wants to meet you. Caleb opened the door to find the shopkeeper standing beside a woman he did not recognize. She was 67 years old with steel gray hair pulled back severely from a face that had seen too much of life and forgiven very little of it. Her eyes were the color of winter ice, and they examined Caleb with the intensity of someone accustomed to making quick judgments about character. May we come in? Silas asked. Caleb stepped aside and let them enter. The woman moved past him without hesitation, choosing the only chair in the room and sitting down with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. You are the fool who hit Victor Garrett, she said. It was not a question. I am the man who stopped him from beating a pregnant woman in the street. The woman studied him for a long moment, her eyes tracking across his face as if reading words written there in a language only she could understand. Her face was all hard angles and old grief, but something in her expression began to soften, showing a hope that had been buried for years. My name is Agnes Whitmore. I run the boarding house at the other end of Main Street. I have lived in this town for 34 years, since my husband brought me here as a bride. He is dead now, buried in the cemetery on the hill. My daughter is dead too, though not buried anywhere, because I do not know where her body lies. She paused and her hands clenched into fists on her lap. Her name was Sarah. She was 22 years old 7 years ago when Victor Garrett decided he wanted her. She refused his advances, told him she was not interested, thought that would be the end of it. She did not understand what kind of man he was. Agnes's voice remained steady, but the knuckles of her clenched fists had gone white. One night, he cornered her in an alley behind my boarding house. She fought him. She screamed. I heard her screaming and came running, but by the time I arrived, he was gone, and she was lying in the mud with her dress torn and her eyes empty of everything that had made her my daughter. She looked directly at Caleb. Sarah left town the next morning. She said she was going to San Francisco to start a new life where no one knew what had happened to her. I received one letter telling me she had arrived safely. Then nothing. 7 years of nothing. I do not know if she is alive or dead, but I know Victor Garrett destroyed her life as surely as if he had killed her with his own hands. I am sorry, Caleb said. Sorry does not help, but action does. Agnes leaned forward in the chair. Silas tells me you are planning to face Victor tomorrow, that you refused to run even after he explained what you would be facing. That is correct. Then you are either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. She pulled a small derringer from her pocket and placed it on the table beside her chair. This was my husband's. He carried it through the war. If tomorrow goes badly, you will need something more than courage. Caleb looked at the gun but did not reach for it. I appreciate the offer, but I am not planning on this being a gunfight. Plans change, Mr. Mercer. They always do. Agnes stood, straightening her dress with the practiced movements of a woman who had learned to maintain dignity in the face of anything. There are 7 of us in this town who are tired of being afraid. Myself, Silas, Dr. Hale, Daniel Compton, who is Silas's grandson, and 3 others. We cannot fight Victor's men openly. We would die in the attempt, but we can help from the shadows. Food, information, a place to hide if you need it. Whatever you require, we will try to provide. Why help me? You do not know me. Because you did what we should have done years ago. You saw wrong and you stopped it. You saw a woman being beaten and you did not look away. Did not tell yourself it was not your business. Did not calculate the cost of intervention. Agnes moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the frame. One more thing. Sheriff Prescott came by my boarding house this evening. He was asking questions about you. I told him you were just a drifter passing through, but I do not think he believed me. What did he say? He said he hoped I was telling the truth, because if you stayed, he would have to choose sides, and he was not sure which side his conscience would pick. Is that a warning or a promise? Both, Mr. Mercer. Both. After they left, Caleb sat alone in the darkness for a long time, the lamp extinguished to save oil and to help him think. He took out the compass Eleanor had given him and turned it over in his hands, feeling the weight of it, tracing the inscription with his thumb until he knew every curve of every letter. So you will always find your way home. Home. He had stopped believing in that word more than a decade ago. Home was a place that had burned to the ground, taking his wife and daughter with it. Home was a pile of ashes he had scattered to the mountain winds because he could not bear to look at them anymore. But sitting here in this small room in this broken town, Caleb felt something stirring in his chest, something that felt almost like purpose, almost like direction. Maybe home was not a place you returned to. Maybe it was a promise you kept. Maybe it was time to start keeping one. Morning brought Victor Garrett to Main Street with murder in his eyes. Caleb watched from the window of Dr. Hale's office as the timber baron emerged from his house at the east end of town, flanked by 8 men who moved with the casual menace of professionals accustomed to violence. Victor himself walked with the stiff gait of someone nursing a hangover and nursing a grudge in equal measure. The bruises from yesterday's confrontation had blossomed across his face overnight, turning his features into a mottled map of purple and yellow. The man at Victor's right hand was enormous, standing at least 6'4", with arms that looked capable of tearing a man in half. His face bore old scars that spoke of countless fights, and his eyes held the flat emptiness of someone who had stopped feeling human emotions long ago. But there was something else there too, something Caleb noticed because he had learned to read men the way other people read books. A tension in the jaw, a heaviness in the posture, the look of a man carrying a weight he could no longer bear. "That is Marcus Stone," Dr. Hale said quietly from behind him. "Victor's primary enforcer. They say he was a mercenary during the war, that he killed men in 3 states before settling here. There are rumors about his family, about something terrible that happened in Nevada, but no one knows the truth. And the others, various criminals and drifters that Victor has collected over the years. The 2 redheads are the Pike brothers. The thin one with the scarred lip is Ray Decker. The rest I do not know by name, but they are all dangerous." Victor stopped in the center of Main Street and raised his voice loud enough to be heard throughout the entire town. "Caleb Mercer, I know you are in there. I am giving you one chance to leave Elkhorn alive. Bring my wife back to where she belongs and walk away. You have until noon to decide." Caleb glanced at the clock on the doctor's wall. 3 hours. "He is not really giving you a choice," Dr. Hale said. "Even if you leave, he will kill Nora. He cannot let her live after what happened yesterday. It would make him look weak in front of his men." "I know. So what are you going to do?" Before Caleb could answer, the door to the examination room opened and Nora appeared. She had changed into a simple dress that Agnes had brought over that morning, and someone had helped her pin up her hair. The bruises on her face were still vivid against her pale skin, but her eyes had lost the hollow emptiness of the previous day. Something had changed in them overnight. Something that looked almost like hope. "I heard," she said. "I heard what he is demanding. You should be resting. I should be many things that I am not." She walked to the window and looked out at the street where her husband stood with his army of killers. Mr. Mercer, there is something else you need to know about Victor, something that might help you understand what you are facing. She turned to face him, her expression caught between shame and determination. 23 years ago, when Victor was 12 years old, his father Jeremiah Garrett killed his mother. Jeremiah was drunk, as he often was, and Miriam, Victor's mother, said something that made him angry. He beat her to death in the parlor of their home, while Victor watched from the top of the stairs. Caleb absorbed this information silently. Jeremiah forced Victor to help him bury the body in the woods outside town. He told everyone that Miriam had run off with a traveling salesman, that she had abandoned her family, and he made Victor swear on his mother's grave, literally on her hidden grave, never to tell anyone what had really happened. What happened to the father? Jeremiah killed himself 2 years later, hung himself in the barn. Victor found the body. He was 14 years old and completely alone in the world, carrying a secret that had eaten through his soul like acid. Nora's voice was quiet but steady. He inherited the lumber mill and built it into the empire it is today. And somewhere along the way, he became exactly what his father had been. Dr. Hale cleared his throat. Why are you telling us this now? Because I want Mr. Mercer to understand what he is facing. Victor is not just a violent man who likes to hurt people. He is a damaged child trapped in a monster's body. He hates women because he remembers watching his mother die and being powerless to stop it. But at the same time, he cannot stop himself from becoming the thing he hated most. He is caught in a cycle that he does not even understand, repeating his father's sins over and over. That explains him, Caleb said after a moment. It does not excuse him. No, nothing could excuse what he has done, but it might help you predict him. Victor's greatest fear is being seen as weak, as powerless, as the child who stood on those stairs and did nothing while his mother died. Everything he does is an attempt to prove that he is strong, that he is in control, that no one can ever hurt him again. She paused. If you threaten that image, if you make him feel powerless in front of his men, he will do anything to destroy you. Anything. A knock at the door made them all turn. Silas entered, looking nervous and excited in equal measure. Sheriff Prescott is outside. He wants to speak with Mr. Mercer, alone. Sheriff Wade Prescott looked like a man who had not slept in weeks and would not sleep again for weeks more. He was 45 years old, tall and thin, with hollowed cheeks and eyes that belonged to someone much older. His badge was pinned to his vest, but he wore it like a penitent wore a hair shirt, as an instrument of self-punishment rather than pride. They met in the alley behind the doctor's office, away from the windows where Victor's men might be watching. I know who you are, the sheriff said without preamble. Caleb Mercer. They used to call you the Ghost. You brought in Bloody Bill Hancock after he burned those homesteads across Nebraska. Caleb said nothing, but something in his face must have changed because the sheriff nodded as if his suspicions had been confirmed. I also know you vanished from public life around the time of Hancock's execution. People said you went crazy with grief. Your wife and daughter were among Hancock's victims. Is there a point to this history lesson, Sheriff? Prescott ran a hand through his thinning hair. The point is that I understand why you did what you did yesterday. I understand the impulse to protect someone weaker, to stop violence when you see it happening. I understand all of that better than you might think. But you cannot win this fight. Prescott's voice dropped, becoming almost a whisper. Victor has 8 armed men who will kill for him without hesitation. His brother Harrison is the district judge in Helena, which means any charges against him will be dismissed before they reach trial. His other brother Emmett runs the telegraph office here, which means he controls all communication in and out of town. The sheriff paused and something in his expression crumbled. And I have been taking his money for 3 years. Then stop taking it. It is not that simple. Prescott reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph, its edges soft from years of handling. The image showed a young girl, perhaps 6 years old, with blonde ringlets and a gap-toothed smile that radiated innocent joy. This is my daughter, Lily. She is 9 now. 3 years ago, when I first refused Victor's money, a man came to her school. He did not hurt her. He did not even speak to her. He just stood at the fence and watched her play. And then he left. Prescott put the photograph away with trembling hands. That night, Victor sent me a message. He said Lily was a beautiful child and it would be a shame if something happened to her. He said he was offering me a business arrangement, not a threat. But we both knew what it really was. So you became his man. I became a coward. Prescott's eyes glistened with tears he was too proud or too broken to shed. Every month I take his money. Every time Nora shows up at the doctor's office with new bruises, I look the other way. Every time someone in this town needs protection, I find reasons why I cannot provide it. I tell myself I am protecting Lily. I tell myself it is better to have a corrupt sheriff than a dead one. I tell myself all kinds of lies because the truth is too ugly to face. Caleb studied the sheriff's face for a long moment. He saw a man torn between the person he wanted to be and the person's circumstances had forced him to become. He saw guilt and shame and self-hatred all competing for dominance. He saw himself, or a version of himself, from 14 years ago. Your daughter is watching, Caleb said quietly. What? Your daughter, Lily. She is watching you every day, whether you realize it or not. Right now, she thinks you are a hero. She thinks you wear that badge because you believe in justice and protection and all the things that badges are supposed to stand for. She looks at you and sees everything she wants to become when she grows up. Prescott flinched as if Caleb had struck him across the face. But one day, maybe soon, she is going to learn the truth. She is going to learn that her father sold his conscience to protect her. And when that day comes, she is going to have to decide what to do with that knowledge. What do you want from me? Nothing, not yet. But when the time comes, and it will come, you are going to have to choose. Not between Victor and me, between the man you are and the man you want your daughter to see. He started to walk away, then paused. One more thing. Yesterday you told Agnes Whitmore that you did not know which side your conscience would pick. I think you do know. You have known for 3 years. You have just been too afraid to admit it. The sheriff was silent for a long moment. Wind whistled down the alley between them, carrying the smell of sawdust from the mill and the faint metallic scent of approaching snow. I cannot promise anything, Prescott said finally, but I will not actively help Victor against you. That is all I can offer right now. It is more than Nora has had in 3 years. Caleb walked away, leaving the sheriff standing alone in the alley, with his badge and his guilt and the photograph of a little girl who still believed her father was a hero. The clock in Dr. Hale's office showed 11:30 when everything changed. Daniel Compton burst through the door, breathing hard from running. He was 17 years old with the lanky frame of an adolescent who had not yet grown into his height in the earnest face of someone who still believed that doing the right thing mattered. Mr. Mercer, there is a woman at the boarding house asking for you. She says she has information about Victor's men. Caleb exchanged glances with Dr. Hale, then followed Daniel through the back streets of Elkhorn. They moved quickly, staying out of sight of Main Street, where Victor's enforcers were still gathered, like vultures waiting for something to die. The boarding house was a 3-story wooden building that had seen better decades but was maintained with obvious care. Agnes was waiting at the back entrance, her face showing the strain of the day's tensions. This way, she said, leading them up a narrow staircase to a room on the second floor. The woman waiting inside was perhaps 38 years old, with black hair streaked with gray and features that marked her as Chinese. She wore the simple clothing of a working woman, and her hands showed the roughness of someone who labored long hours at physical tasks. But her eyes were sharp and watchful, assessing Caleb with the same intensity he was using to assess her. This is Maylin Chen, Agnes said. She runs the laundry service at the edge of town. Her husband worked at Victor's mill until 3 years ago. What happened to him? Caleb asked. Maylin's expression did not change, but her voice carried the cold weight of grief that time had compressed into something hard and permanent. He died in an accident at the mill. A beam fell on him. That is what they told me. What they did not tell me was that my husband had refused to sell our property to Victor the week before, the property Victor needed to expand his mill. You think it was not an accident? I know it was not an accident. 3 other men saw what really happened. 2 of them left town within a month. The third was found dead in his cabin, supposedly from a heart attack. He was 32 years old and had never been sick a day in his life. She paused, letting the implications settle. I could not prove anything. And even if I could, no one would believe a Chinese widow over Victor Garrett. So I stayed, and I watched, and I waited. For 3 years, I have been waiting for someone to stand against him. What can you offer? Information. The laundry service washes clothes for everyone in town, including Victor's men. I hear things they say when they do not think anyone is listening. I see things they try to hide in their pockets. I know their habits, their weaknesses, their fears. She paused again, and something changed in her expression. There is one more thing. About Marcus Stone. He has been acting strangely these past weeks. How so? He stopped drinking with the others. He spends his evenings alone, walking the streets at night, staring at nothing. Last week, when Victor ordered him to burn down a farmer's shed as punishment for unpaid debts, Marcus hesitated. I was nearby, bringing laundry to another customer, and I saw his face. He looked almost sick. He did it eventually, but something in his eyes looked like shame. Mei Lin leaned forward slightly. And there is more. I also have skills that might be useful if Nora goes into labor during your escape. What kind of skills? My grandmother was a medicine woman in Guangdong province. She delivered hundreds of babies in villages where there were no doctors, where women died in childbirth every month until she came. She taught me everything she knew before I came to this country. She looked toward Dr. Hale, who had followed them to the boarding house. I heard about Nora's heart condition. Western medicine may not be able to help her in the circumstances you are facing, but there are techniques, herbal preparations, pressure points that my grandmother used to save women in similar situations. They are not what your doctors learn in their schools, but they have saved lives that Western medicine had given up on. Dr. Hale spoke up, professional curiosity overriding skepticism. What kind of techniques? Malin described a combination of herbs and pressure points that could stabilize a failing heart and delay premature labor. The doctor listened with growing interest, asking questions that showed he was taking her seriously despite the unorthodox nature of her knowledge. This could work, he said finally. The theory is sound, even if the methods are unfamiliar. If we can delay Nora's labor and strengthen her heart, she might survive long enough to reach a proper hospital. The nearest hospital is in Helena, Caleb said. 4 days by normal road in good weather. There is another way, Daniel said. All eyes turned to the teenager. He flushed under the attention but continued, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. The old mining trail through the mountains. My grandfather used to take me hunting up there before Victor bought the mineral rights and closed off access. It is dangerous, especially in winter, with narrow passes and old mine shafts that could collapse. But it cuts the journey to Helena down to 2.5 days, maybe less if you push hard. Does Victor know about this trail? I do not think so. His people came after the mines closed. They would not have any reason to know the old routes. Caleb considered the options. 4 days on the main road meant 4 days for Victor to catch them. 4 days of exposure to his men and his vengeance. 2.5 days on a dangerous mountain trail meant risking death by exposure or accident, but it also meant a chance of escape. Neither choice was good, but one choice gave Nora and her baby a chance. The other gave them none. We leave tonight, he said, after dark, when Victor's men are not expecting movement. In the meantime, I need to know everything about their positions, their habits, when they sleep, and when they change watch. Everything. The group dispersed to their various tasks, each carrying a piece of the plan that might save 2 lives or might get them all killed. As Caleb was preparing to leave, Mei Lin touched his arm. Mr. Mercer, one more thing about Marcus Stone. Whatever is happening inside him, whatever guilt or doubt is eating at him, do not trust it completely. A man can feel remorse and still follow orders. A man can hate what he does and still do it. But sometimes when a man reaches the breaking point, he surprises everyone, including himself. The hours until nightfall passed with agonizing slowness. Caleb spent them preparing for the journey, gathering supplies, and studying the crude map Daniel had drawn of the mountain trail. The route was indeed dangerous, following old mining tracks that had not been maintained in years. Narrow passages where a single misstep could send wagon and passengers tumbling into frozen ravines. Ice-covered bridges built for men and mules, not heavy wagons. Abandoned mine shafts whose supporting timbers had rotted away, waiting to swallow anyone who ventured too close. But it was their only real chance. At dusk, Agnes came to him with news that made the situation more complicated. Sheriff Prescott was seen leaving town about an hour ago. He was heading toward the North Road, in the direction of the mining trail. Following us? I do not know. Some people say he was just going on patrol, but others think he might be meeting someone. If he has told Victor about the trail, Caleb considered this. If Prescott had betrayed them, the entire plan was worthless. They would be walking into an ambush with no way out. But if the sheriff was simply wrestling with his conscience, his absence might actually help their escape. There was only one way to find out. We stick to the plan. If it is a trap, we will deal with it when we get there. By full dark, everything was ready. Nora had been given Maylene's first dose of herbs and was resting more comfortably than she had in months. The combination of ginger root, dong quai, and several other ingredients Caleb could not identify had eased the irregular rhythm of her heart and brought color back to her cheeks. She was still weak, still fragile, but she looked less like a woman waiting to die. Daniel had prepared a wagon with the strongest horses from his grandfather's stable, chosen for endurance rather than speed. Dr. Hale had packed his medical bag with everything he might need for an emergency delivery. Malin had brought additional herbs and supplies wrapped in clean cloth, arranged with the precision of someone who had done this many times before. The plan was simple in concept, difficult in execution. Silas and Agnes would create a distraction at the old lumber warehouse on the outskirts of town, a small fire that would draw attention without causing real damage. While Victor's men were occupied, the wagon would slip out through the back streets and head for the mountain trail. It was not a good plan, but it was the only one they had. While the others made their final preparations, Sheriff Wade Prescott sat alone in a room at Agnes's boarding house. He had borrowed paper and pen from Silas, telling them he needed to write a report. Now he stared at the blank page, trying to find words for something he had never been able to say. Finally, he began to write. My dearest Lily, if you are reading this letter, it means I did not come home. I need you to know something important, something I should have told you long ago, but never had the courage. For 3 years, I have made choices that shamed me. I took money from a bad man because I was afraid of what would happen to you if I refused. I told myself I was protecting you, but the truth is I was protecting myself from having to be brave. I was protecting myself from the risk of doing what was right. Tonight, I am going to try to be the father you deserve. I am going to help some good people escape from that bad man. It is dangerous, and I might not survive. There are men with guns who will try to stop us, and I am only one person against many. But I would rather die trying to do the right thing than live another day as a coward. When you grow up, people will tell you that being brave means not being afraid. That is a lie, sweetheart. Being brave means being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. It means feeling the fear in your belly and the weakness in your legs and choosing to stand up instead of run away. Remember that. Remember that your father loved you enough to finally be brave. Forever yours, Papa. He folded the letter carefully and gave it to Agnes with instructions to deliver it to Lily only if he did not return. Then he checked his pistol, pulled on his coat, and walked out into the night to take his position. At exactly 9 o'clock, flames began to lick at the warehouse roof. The alarm went up immediately, and Caleb watched from the shadows as Victor's men ran toward the fire, their attention fully captured by the blaze that threatened to spread to the mill. Now, he said. Daniel snapped the reins and the wagon lurched forward into the darkness. Caleb walked beside it, rifle ready, eyes scanning every shadow for threats. Behind him, Dr. Hale and Maylene tended to Nora, who lay on a makeshift bed of blankets with her hands clasped protectively over her belly. They cleared the edge of town without incident. The snow-covered trail stretched before them, winding up into the black mass of the mountains that loomed against the star-filled sky. Daniel guided the horses with surprising skill for someone so young, finding the path even when it seemed to disappear entirely into drifts and darkness. An hour passed, then 2. The fire in town was a distant orange glow behind them, and the only sounds were the crunch of hooves on snow, the creak of wagon wheels, and the endless whisper of wind through pine trees. Then Caleb heard something else. Hooves, many of them, coming fast from behind. Off the trail, he hissed. Into the trees. Now. Daniel hauled on the reins, guiding the wagon off the path and into a dense stand of pines. They had barely stopped moving, barely silenced the horses, when riders thundered past. Torches blazing, voices shouting, heading up the mountain trail at a pace that would kill their horses before morning. Caleb counted 6 riders. One of them was enormous, his bulk unmistakable even in the darkness. Marcus Stone, and 5 of Victor's men. They were not heading toward the fire. They were heading up the mountain. Someone had told them about the trail. The riders disappeared into the darkness ahead, their torches flickering between the trees like demon eyes before vanishing entirely. Caleb waited until the sound of hooves faded completely before signaling for Daniel to move the wagon back onto the trail. "They know," Dr. Hale said, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. "Someone told them about the route." "Yes. We should turn back. Find another way." "There is no other way." Caleb looked at Nora, who had awakened during the commotion. Her face was pale in the moonlight, but her eyes were steady, resigned to whatever was coming. "We keep moving. They are ahead of us now, which means they will be expecting us to come from below. We need to find a way around them." Daniel spoke up, his voice barely a whisper, but filled with sudden hope. "There is a fork in the trail about 2 miles ahead. The main path goes through Miller's Pass, which is the easiest route through the mountains. But there is an older trail that branches off and goes through the abandoned mining settlement. It is harder and longer, but it comes out on the other side of the pass." "Do Victor's men know about this second trail?" "I do not think so. It has not been used in years, not since the mine closed down. My grandfather only showed it to me because he was worried about getting caught in a blizzard and needing an alternate route." "Then that is where we go." They pressed on through the darkness, moving as quickly as the terrain would allow. The temperature continued to drop, and Caleb could see his breath forming thick clouds in the lamplight. Snow began to fall again, light at first but growing heavier with each passing minute. The sky was closing in. When they reached the fork, Daniel guided the wagon onto the narrower path without hesitation. The trail was barely wide enough for the wagon wheels, and branches scraped against the sides like skeletal fingers as they pushed deeper into the forest. Caleb walked ahead now, breaking a path through the deepening snow, his rifle ready for any threat that might emerge from the darkness. 2 hours later, they reached the old mining settlement. It was a ghost town in the truest sense. 3 buildings sagged against each other at the edge of a frozen stream, their windows dark and empty, their walls slowly surrendering to decades of wind and snow. A collapsed mine entrance marked the far end of the clearing, its timbers rotted and scattered like broken bones. The whole place smelled of decay and abandonment and lost hope. "We stop here," as Caleb said. "Rest the horses. Check on Nora. We move again at first light." They made camp inside the largest building, which turned out to be an old bunkhouse that had once housed dozens of miners. The roof was miraculously intact, and there was a potbelly stove in the corner that still worked despite years of neglect. Daniel found dry wood under a tarp behind the building, and within 20 minutes they had a fire going and warmth spreading through the room. Nora was moved to a cot near the stove, wrapped in every blanket they had brought. Her breathing was shallow but steady, and Maylene checked her pulse with practiced fingers, her face revealing nothing. "She is stable for now, but the labor will not wait much longer. The baby is ready to come. Perhaps today, perhaps tomorrow. I can delay it with herbs, but not for long." Dr. Hale examined Nora with his stethoscope, listening to her heart with the focused attention of a man who knew he might be hearing the last beats. His face was grim when he looked up. "Her heart is struggling. The cold is making it worse. If we cannot get her to Helena within the next day or two, even reaching the hospital might not be enough." "How much time do we have?" 8 hours, maybe 12. After that, even if everything else goes perfectly, it might be too late." Caleb stepped outside into the falling snow. The storm was building now, wind whipping through the abandoned buildings with increasing fury. He could barely see 20 feet in any direction. Travel in these conditions would be nearly suicidal. They were trapped. He took out the compass and opened it, not expecting anything, just seeking the familiar weight of it in his hand. The brass was cold against his palm, the inscription barely visible in the dim light filtering through the clouds. And then he noticed something strange. The needle was not spinning wildly as it had done for 14 years. It was trembling, oscillating back and forth in a narrow arc, as if it was trying to find north but could not quite lock onto the direction. Caleb stared at it for a long moment, not understanding. Then he closed the case and put it away. There would be time to think about compasses later. Right now, there was a pregnant woman inside who needed to live, and a gang of killers somewhere on the mountain who intended to make sure she did not. A sound made him turn, rifle coming up automatically. A figure emerged from the darkness, hands raised, face obscured by a heavy hood covered with snow. "Do not shoot. I am alone." Caleb recognized the voice. His finger tightened on the trigger. "Show yourself." The figure pushed back the hood, revealing the scarred face of Marcus Stone. "Give me one reason not to kill you right now." "Because I am not here to fight." Marcus kept his hands visible, spread wide and empty. "I am here to help." "You work for Victor." "I worked for Victor." Past tense. Marcus took a careful step forward, moving slowly so Caleb could see he meant no threat. "May I come inside? The cold is brutal, and what I have to say will take some time." Against every instinct he possessed, Caleb lowered the rifle slightly. "One wrong move and you die." "Understood." Inside the bunkhouse, the others reacted to Marcus's presence with varying degrees of alarm. Daniel grabbed for his pistol with shaking hands. Dr. Hale stepped in front of Nora, putting himself between her and the giant who had helped terrorize this town for years. Only Mei Lin remained still, watching with calculating eyes that missed nothing. "Tell me why I should not let them kill you," Caleb said. Marcus Stone sat down heavily on a wooden crate, his massive frame making the container creak ominously under his weight. Up close, his face looked even more battered than Caleb had initially thought. A roadmap of old wounds and older regrets, with fresh pains showing in eyes that had seen too much. "8 years ago," Marcus began, his voice rough and low, "I was a miner in Nevada. I had a wife named Sarah and a son named Thomas. He was 3 years old. We were poor but happy. I woke up every morning glad to be alive, glad to have them. I thought I had everything a man could want." He paused, staring at the fire, as if he could see his past burning in the flames. "There was a collapse at the mine. 42 men were underground when it happened. I was one of the lucky ones, working near the entrance. I got out. 14 others did not. 14 men with families, with children, with lives that ended because the company did not want to spend money on proper timber supports." His hands clenched into fists on his knees. "The company that owned the mine refused to pay compensation to the families of the dead. They said the collapse was an act of God, not their responsibility. So I sued them. I organized the other survivors. I made noise, went to newspapers, tried to get justice for the men who died. What happened? They sent men to beat me. 4 of them. Professional thugs who knew exactly how to hurt a man without killing him. They broke my ribs, my nose, my arm in 2 places. They told me to drop the lawsuit or next time they would visit my family." Marcus's voice cracked like ice breaking on a spring river. "When I recovered, Sarah was gone. She had taken Thomas and left in the middle of the night because she was afraid of what would happen if she stayed. She left a note saying she loved me, but she could not watch me die, could not risk our son's life for a lawsuit we were never going to win. I never saw them again." "And you became what?" Caleb asked, his voice hard. "A hired thug? A man who beats pregnant women for money?" "Yes." Marcus met his eyes without flinching, accepting the condemnation. "I became exactly what the men who destroyed my life had been. I told myself it was necessary, that I was just doing what I had to do to survive. I told myself all kinds of lies because the truth was too ugly to look at." "What changed?" "Yesterday, when Victor ordered me to help burn down the boarding house. He said it did not matter if the pregnant woman was inside. He said it would teach the town a lesson." Marcus's massive hands were trembling now, shaking with emotion he could barely contain. "I remembered Thomas. I remembered the last time I held him, how small he was in my arms, how he trusted me completely. And I realized that if my son could see what I had become, he would not recognize me. He would be afraid of me. He would be right to be afraid." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, which he handed to Caleb. "This is a map of where Victor's men are positioned along the main trail. They are waiting in Miller's Pass, expecting you to come through there. They do not know about this secondary route through the mining settlement." Caleb unfolded the paper and studied it. The map was detailed, showing positions and sight lines and gaps in coverage. How do I know this is not a trap? You do not. You have no reason to trust me and every reason not to. But I left Victor's service tonight. I am a dead man if he finds me now, as surely as any of you. I have nothing to gain by lying and everything to lose. Ah, what do you want? I want to be someone my son would not be ashamed of. Marcus stood up slowly, carefully, keeping his hands visible. I cannot undo the things I have done. God knows I have tried to forget them, tried to drink them away, tried to pretend they were someone else's sins. But they are mine. All of them. He paused, looking at Nora, at her swollen belly, at the life she was fighting to protect. But maybe I can do one thing right. Maybe I can help you get her to safety, and then I leave Montana forever. I go to Nevada and try to find my family. Maybe Sarah will not want to see me. Maybe Thomas will not even remember who I am. But I have to try. Caleb made his decision. You can stay until the storm passes. After that, if we are still alive, you go your own way. But if I see any sign that this is a trick, if you make one move toward Nora or anyone else here, I will kill you without hesitation. Fair enough. The storm raged through the night and into the morning. By dawn, 3 feet of fresh snow had fallen, burying the trails and making travel impossible. They were trapped in the mining settlement, but so was everyone else, including Victor's men in Miller's Pass. Caleb used the time to prepare for what was coming. He checked weapons, studied Marcus's map, planned alternate routes in case everything went wrong. Daniel helped where he could, eager to prove himself useful, while Dr. Hale and Maylene focused all their attention on keeping Nora stable. In the quiet moments between preparations, Caleb found himself sitting with Nora. Her condition had stabilized somewhat, thanks to Maylene's herbs, but she was still dangerously weak. The baby could come at any moment. Tell me about your wife, she said during one of these quiet moments. The one who gave you the compass. Caleb hesitated. He had spent more than a decade not talking about Eleanor. The words felt rusty, difficult, like a door that had been locked so long the hinges had frozen solid. Her name was Eleanor. She was a teacher back in Nebraska before I joined up with the federal marshals. She taught reading to anyone who wanted to learn, regardless of who they were or where they came from. That is how we met. I was a bounty hunter who could track anything that moved, but could not make sense of a written map. She thought that was the funniest thing she had ever heard. A ghost of a smile crossed his face at the memory. She laughed at me for a full minute before she could speak. Then she sat me down and taught me the alphabet like I was a child. I was 26 years old and I did not know the difference between a B and a D. She never made me feel stupid for it. She just taught me, patient as a saint, until I could read well enough to do my job. She sounds wonderful. She was. She was also stubborn beyond all reason. When the fever came through Fort Benson, she refused to leave even though I begged her to take Rose and go somewhere safe. She said the sick needed someone to read to them, to keep their spirits up in the quarantine tents. She said it was her duty. That is not your fault, Nora said softly. Her staying, I mean. I know. Knowing and feeling are different things. Caleb took out the compass and turned it over in his hands, running his thumb across the inscription. I spent 14 years blaming myself, hiding in the mountains because facing people felt like betrayal. Every time I saw a woman with dark hair, every time I heard a child laugh, it was like being stabbed. What changed? Yesterday, when I saw Victor hitting you in the street, Caleb looked at her with eyes that held pain and hope in equal measure. I saw Eleanor in your face. I saw all the times I was not there when someone needed me, all the times I chose duty over presence, and I decided that this time I would stay. Nora's hand found his. Her grip was weak but warm. My daughter, if she survives, if I survive, I want her to know that someone fought for us. That when everyone else looked away, when the whole world seemed willing to let us die, one man stood up. She will know. Will you tell her? If I do not make it? Caleb squeezed her hand gently. You are going to tell her yourself. That is a promise. Later, when the others were sleeping and the fire had burned down to embers, Caleb stepped outside to check the weather. The snow had stopped falling, and stars were beginning to appear through breaks in the clouds. The storm was passing, which meant they would have to move soon, and Victor's men would be able to move too. He was about to go back inside when he noticed something in the snow. Footprints, fresh ones, leading away from the bunkhouse and toward the collapsed mine entrance. He followed them with his rifle ready, moving silently through the snow. The prints led to a pile of rubble near the old mine, where Marcus Stone sat alone, staring at something in his hands. "Trouble sleeping?" Caleb asked. Marcus looked up, startled but not alarmed. In his massive hands was a small daguerreotype, an image of a woman and a young boy, faded with age and handling. "This is all I have left of them," he said. "Sarah and Thomas. I have carried it for 8 years, through everything. Sometimes I take it out just to remind myself that I was human once." Caleb sat down on a snow-covered beam, keeping a comfortable distance. "Will you really try to find them?" "Yes, if I survive this. If they will see me." Marcus looked at the image one more time, then put it carefully away. "Sarah's sister lived in Carson City. That is where I will start looking. Even if Sarah does not want to see me, maybe she will let me see Thomas, even from a distance, even just once." "What will you tell him about what you have done?" "The truth, that his father made terrible choices after losing everything, that I became a monster because it was easier than being a man, and that one day when it mattered most, I tried to be human again." He looked at Caleb with eyes that held no hope for forgiveness, only the desperate need to confess. "I cannot undo what I have done. The people I have hurt, the lives I have destroyed, they are gone forever. But maybe if I help you get Nora to safety, if I do this one thing right, I can look at myself in the mirror again without wanting to put a bullet through the glass." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, thinking about his own years of running, his own guilt, his own inability to forgive himself for failures real and imagined. "You know," he said finally, "I spent 14 years punishing myself for not being there when my family died. I told myself I did not deserve to be happy, did not deserve to feel anything but pain. I thought suffering was the same as atonement. Is it not? No. Suffering is just suffering. It does not bring the dead back. It does not heal the wounds you caused. It just makes you less capable of doing good in the future." Caleb stood up and brushed snow from his coat. "The only real atonement is choosing to be better. Every day, for the rest of your life." He started back toward the bunkhouse, then paused. "Get some sleep, Stone. Tomorrow's going to be hard." The storm broke on the second morning. The snow stopped falling. The wind died down, and pale winter sunlight began filtering through the clouds like a blessing from a god who had finally decided to pay attention. But the damage was done. The trails were buried under 4 feet of fresh powder, making wagon travel nearly impossible. Even on foot, progress would be measured in yards rather than miles. "We cannot go forward with the wagon," Daniel said, surveying the scene with the practiced eye of someone who had spent his whole life in these mountains. "Even with horses breaking trail, we would be lucky to make a mile before nightfall." "What about on foot?" Caleb asked. "Maybe, but we cannot carry Nora over terrain like this. And her condition—" He trailed off, not wanting to finish the sentence. Dr. Hale emerged from the bunkhouse, his face a mask of professional concern that barely concealed the fear beneath. "She has started having contractions. Real ones this time, not the false ones from before. The baby is coming, whether we are ready or not." "How long?" "Hours at most. We need to prepare for delivery here." Caleb looked at the ruined mining settlement, at the rotting buildings and collapsed structures, and the vast white emptiness of the mountains stretching in every direction. They were trapped in the worst possible place, with the worst possible timing. "What do you need?" "Clean water, clean blankets, as much firewood as we can find to keep the room warm, and prayer, Mr. Mercer. Pray that everything I learned in medical school and everything May Lynn learned from her grandmother is enough." The delivery began at noon and lasted until sunset. Nora's screams echoed through the empty mining settlement, carried by the wind into the surrounding wilderness, where only wolves and eagles could hear them. Caleb stood guard outside the bunkhouse, rifle ready, watching for any sign of Victor's men. Marcus had taken position at the far end of the clearing, covering the approach from Miller's Pass with his own weapon. Daniel shuttled between them, keeping watch and keeping busy, because standing still would mean thinking about what was happening inside. In the bunkhouse, Dr. Hale and Maylene worked together in a desperate collaboration of Western medicine and Eastern tradition that neither had ever attempted before. The doctor guided the physical aspects of the delivery, using his training and experience to handle the mechanics of birth. Maylin used pressure points and herbs to stabilize Nora's failing heart, to give her strength when her body wanted to quit, to keep the rhythm of life steady when it threatened to flutter and stop. It was a dance of healing improvised in a dying mining town, while a blizzard's aftermath buried the world outside. Twice Nora's heart stopped. The first time, Maylin's techniques brought it back within seconds, her skilled fingers finding the pressure points that could restart a stopped heart. The second time took longer. Nearly 2 minutes of desperate work, of Dr. Hale performing chest compressions, while Maylene shouted instructions, and Daniel prayed to a God he was not sure he believed in anymore. But Nora Garrett was stronger than anyone had given her credit for. She had survived 3 years of abuse that would have broken most people. She had survived a forced march through a mountain blizzard while 7 months pregnant. She had survived being beaten and starved and told every day that she was worthless. She was not going to die now, not with her baby so close to being born. At sunset, as the last light was fading from the sky and painting the snow in shades of golden orange, a new sound joined Nora's exhausted cries, the wail of a newborn baby. Dr. Hale emerged from the bunkhouse carrying a small bundle wrapped in the cleanest blanket they had. His face was drawn with exhaustion that seemed to go beyond the physical, but something like wonder showed in his eyes, the awe that comes from participating in a miracle. A girl, he said, healthy, strong lungs. And Nora? Alive. Weak, but alive. Maylin's techniques saved her life. I could not have done it without her knowledge. Caleb looked at the tiny face peeking out from the blankets. The baby had stopped crying and was looking up at the darkening sky with the unfocused intensity of the newly born, seeing a world she could not yet understand, but was already a part of. She was so small, so fragile, so completely dependent on the people around her. For the first time since losing Eleanor and Rose, Caleb felt something other than grief when he looked at a child. He felt hope. He felt possibility. He felt the future reaching out and asking him to be part of it. But before he could respond to that feeling, shouts echoed from the edge of the settlement. Marcus came running through the snow, his massive frame moving with surprising speed. Riders coming, at least 4, maybe more. They found our trail. Caleb grabbed his rifle. How far? 20 minutes at most. They are pushing hard despite the snow. There was no time for complicated plans. Caleb took stock of their resources. Marcus was armed and apparently willing to fight. Daniel had a pistol but had never shot a man in his life. Dr. Hale could not be spared from Nora's bedside. Maylin was formidable in her own way, but had no weapons. Daniel, get everyone into the mine entrance. The collapsed section near the back will provide cover if they try to rush us. Marcus, you take position on the left flank. I will meet them head on. You cannot face them alone, Marcus said. I am not asking for a vote. Just do what I said. The next 20 minutes were the longest of Caleb's life. He positioned himself behind a fallen log at the edge of the clearing, rifle aimed at the approach trail, waiting for riders who were coming to kill a woman and her newborn child because one man could not stand to be defied. They appeared through the trees like demons emerging from hell. 4 men on horseback, moving carefully now because of the deep snow and the uncertainty of what waited ahead. At their front was Victor Garrett himself, his face twisted with rage that was visible even at 100 yards. But the fifth figure made Caleb's stomach clench. Sheriff Wade Prescott rode beside Victor, his head down, his hands bound to his saddle horn. They had captured him somewhere on the mountain. Whatever help he had been trying to bring, it had arrived too late. Victor raised his hand and the group stopped about 50 yards from the settlement. His voice carried clearly in the cold evening air. Mercer, I know you are in there. Come out now and I will make this quick. Caleb remained silent, letting them wonder, letting them fear. I have your sheriff friend here, the one who tried to warn you about our ambush. Victor's laugh was ugly, a sound that belonged in nightmares. He thought he was being clever, sneaking off to send a telegram to Helena. But my brother Emmett intercepts all telegraph traffic. We knew what he was doing before he finished writing the message. Still, Caleb remained hidden, watching, calculating. Every minute you stay hidden, I hurt him a little more. One of Victor's men dismounted and approached Prescott with a knife. In the fading light, Caleb saw the blade flash. Prescott's scream echoed off the mountains like the cry of a wounded animal. That was his left ear. Next is his right. And after that, I get creative. Caleb made a decision. He could not save Prescott by hiding. The sheriff would be tortured to death while he watched from concealment. But if he revealed himself, he might be able to create an opportunity, divide their attention, find a moment of weakness. He stood up from behind the log, rifle raised but not aimed. Let him go, Garrett. Your fight is with me. Victor turned his horse toward Caleb, a predator's grin spreading across his bruised and swollen face. There you are. I have been waiting for this. I said let him go. Why would I do that? He betrayed me. Tried to bring federal marshals down on my operation. Victor dismounted, pulling his own rifle from its saddle scabbard. You know what the penalty for betrayal is in my organization? Death. Slow and painful death. The penalty for murder is hanging. You have already shot a law officer back in town. How much deeper do you want to dig your grave? I own the law here. After all these years, you still have not figured that out. Victor began walking toward Caleb, his rifle held casually but ready for action. My brother is the district judge. Any charges against me will be dismissed before they reach trial. Witnesses will recant their testimony or disappear entirely. Evidence will be lost or destroyed. He stopped about 20 feet away, close enough that Caleb could see the madness in his eyes. This is my territory, Mercer. My rules. And my rules say that anyone who defies me dies screaming. Like your mother died screaming? Victor froze. The blood drained from his face so fast Caleb thought he might faint. I know about your father, Caleb continued, his voice quiet but carrying clearly in the still air. I know what he did to her while you watched from the stairs. I know what he made you help him bury in the woods. Shut up. Victor's voice was a whisper. You have spent your whole life trying to be the opposite of what he was. But look at yourself now, beating your wife, terrorizing your town, getting ready to kill a woman and her newborn baby because you cannot stand to be defied. I said, shut up. You are exactly what he was. The drinking, the violence, the need to control women because you cannot control anything else. Your mother would weep if she could see what her son has become. Victor screamed and charged, rifle forgotten, fists swinging. It was exactly what Caleb had been hoping for. He sidestepped the first wild punch and drove the butt of his rifle into Victor's stomach. Victor doubled over, gasping, and Caleb followed with a knee to his face that snapped his head back and sent blood spraying across the snow. But Victor's men were moving now. The 3 remaining riders had their weapons drawn and were spurring their horses forward. This was where everything either worked or fell apart. Marcus Stone stepped out of the shadows behind the riders, pistol aimed at the back of the nearest man. Everyone hold still. 2 of the men spun in their saddles, confused by this new threat appearing from nowhere. Marcus, one of them said, what the hell are you doing? Something I should have done years ago. Marcus's voice was steady as stone. Drop your weapons, all of you. This is over. You work for Victor. I worked for Victor, past tense. As of right now, I work for my own conscience. The standoff lasted for a heartbeat. Then one of Victor's men, the youngest and stupidest of the group, made the mistake of trying to draw on Marcus. Marcus shot him before his pistol cleared the holster. Everything exploded into chaos. The remaining 2 men went for their weapons. Caleb fired at Victor, catching him in the shoulder as he tried to rise. Victor screamed and fell backward into the bloody snow. Marcus exchanged shots with the other riders, dropping one and sending the second fleeing into the darkness with a bullet in his leg. In less than 30 seconds, it was over. Victor lay in the snow, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. 2 of his men were dead. The third was somewhere in the darkness, wounded and running. And Prescott was still alive, bleeding from the wound where his ear had been but conscious and aware. Caleb approached Victor with his rifle aimed at the wounded man's head. It is finished, Garrett. Your men are gone. Your power is broken. You are going to face justice for everything you have done. Victor laughed. It was a terrible sound, wet with blood and thick with denial. You think this changes anything? My brother will get me out. He always does. Not this time. Caleb pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. Before you captured him, Sheriff Prescott managed to get a telegram through to Helena. Not through your brother's office. Through the railroad telegraph station. Federal marshals are already on their way. The laugh died in Victor's throat. For the first time, real fear showed in his eyes. The fear of a boy watching his mother die and knowing he was powerless to stop it. You cannot do this. I am Victor Garrett. I own this town. I own these mountains. I own everything. Not anymore. Caleb turned to Marcus. Tie him up. We are taking him back to Elkhorn to face trial. As Marcus secured the prisoner, Caleb went to check on Prescott. The sheriff was conscious despite his wounds, his eyes showing pain but also something that looked like peace. The message got through, Prescott asked weakly. It did. The marshals will be here within a day or two. Good. The sheriff managed a smile that was half grimace. Maybe now Lily will not be ashamed of me anymore. She never was, and neither should you be. He helped Prescott to his feet and supported him as they walked back toward the bunkhouse where Nora was waiting with her newborn daughter, alive against all odds, protected by a man who had finally stopped running from his ghosts. Later that night, when Victor had been secured and Prescott's wounds had been treated and the immediate dangers had passed, Caleb sat beside Nora's bed. She was awake but exhausted, the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms for the first time. We need to talk about Thomas, she said quietly. Caleb waited. The merchant? The one who might be Eleanor's father. Nora looked down at the baby's face, searching for resemblances that might or might not exist. Should I try to find him? Tell him about her? Caleb considered the question carefully before answering. What do you want to do? I do not know. Part of me thinks he deserves to know. He was kind to me when I needed kindness most. He gave me something to hold on to during the worst time of my life. She paused, her fingers gently touching the baby's cheek. But another part of me thinks some things are better left as they are. He had his own life, his own path. He is probably in Oregon now, building something new. If I track him down, I might be complicating something that should remain simple. Then do not decide now. Wait until you are stronger, until Eleanor is older. If you still want to find him then, I will help you. But this child already has a mother who loves her more than life itself. The rest can be figured out later. Nora leaned back against the pillows, relief showing on her exhausted face. And if Eleanor asks someday, when she is older, about her real father, then you tell her the truth, that she was born from a moment of kindness in a time of darkness, that her mother loved her enough to risk everything for her, that sometimes the people who raise us matter more than the people who created us. He paused, looking at the baby with something soft in his eyes, and that the man who chose to be her family did so not because of blood, but because of love. It was not a perfect answer, but it was an honest one. And Caleb had learned long ago that honest answers were usually the best ones, even when they were incomplete. I want to name her, Nora said suddenly. Do you have something in mind? She looked at him with eyes that held tears and hope in equal measure. Eleanor May. Eleanor, after your wife. And May, after the woman who saved both our lives tonight. Caleb felt something break open in his chest. Not pain this time. Release. Something he had been carrying for more than a decade finally letting go. Finally accepting that the past was past and the future was waiting. Eleanor would have been honored, he said, his voice rough with emotion he had almost forgotten how to feel. And May Lynn will be too. 6 months later, Elkhorn in summer was a different town than Elkhorn in winter. The snow had melted long ago, replaced by wildflowers that painted the meadows in colors Caleb had almost forgotten existed. The lumber mill still operated, though under new ownership since the Garrett family assets had been seized. The air smelled of pine and honeysuckle and the clean promise of new beginnings. Caleb stood on the porch of the building that now served as the sheriff's office, watching the morning traffic flow down Main Street. He wore a badge on his chest. He still was not entirely sure how that had happened. After Sheriff Prescott resigned following his recovery, the town council had struggled to find a replacement. Nobody wanted the job. Too many memories of what had happened under Victor's rule. Too much fear that another man might be corrupted the same way. It was Agnes who suggested Caleb, The suggestion was seconded by every person who had stood against Victor, by Dr. Hale and May Lynn, by Daniel Compton and his grandfather Silas, even by Marcus Stone, who had written from Nevada expressing his support before disappearing into his search for his lost family. Caleb had refused at first. He had come to Elkhorn to buy supplies, not to put down roots. But Nora had asked him. She had looked at him with eyes that no longer held fear, only hope and gratitude, and something that might have been love. Eleanor needs a town where she can grow up safe, she had said. Help me make Elkhorn that town. So he had accepted the badge. And every morning since, he woke up in a place that felt increasingly like home. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Dr. Hale entered, looking healthier and happier than Caleb had ever seen him. "Good morning, Sheriff." The doctor's use of the title was still slightly teasing, as if neither of them could quite believe it. "I have come to deliver news." "Good news or bad?" "Decidedly good. I just received word from Helena. Victor Garrett was convicted on all charges. 25 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole. His brother Harrison has been removed from the bench and is awaiting his own trial." Caleb let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. "And the rest of Victor's organization?" "Scattered to the winds. Most of them fled the territory after the marshals came through. A few are serving time for various crimes. The empire Victor built is completely finished." After the doctor left, Caleb walked down Main Street toward the boarding house. Agnes still ran it, though business had improved considerably since the Garrett family's fall. Travelers felt safe stopping in Elkhorn now. The town had a reputation for justice rather than corruption. Nora met him at the door with Eleanor in her arms. The baby was 6 months old now, with a tuft of dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything around her with intense curiosity. She recognized Caleb immediately and reached for him with chubby, grasping hands. "Good morning," Nora said, smiling as she transferred the baby to his arms. "You look like you got news." Victor was convicted. 25 years. Nora's smile faltered for just a moment, old fear rising before being pushed firmly down again. "It is really over then. It is really over. He will never hurt you or Eleanor or anyone else again." They sat together on the porch, watching Elkhorn go about its daily business. Daniel, now apprenticed to Dr. Hale and studying medicine, hurried past with a bag full of supplies. Silas swept the front of his store with the contentment of a man whose conscience was finally clear. May Lynn's expanded laundry business now employed 4 women who had been left destitute by Victor's fall. Sheriff Prescott appeared from the direction of the schoolhouse, his daughter Lily holding his hand. He had been re-elected after the truth about his actions came out. The people of Elkhorn recognizing that he had risked everything to do the right thing in the end. His missing ear was hidden by his hair, but the scar served as a reminder of the price of courage. "Sheriff Mercer," Prescott said with a respectful nod. "Prescott, I heard about the conviction. Congratulations. It was not my doing. The marshals built the case. You made the case possible." Prescott squeezed his daughter's hand. "Lily wanted to thank you again, by the way. She drew you another picture." The girl stepped forward shyly and presented Caleb with a piece of paper covered in crayon. It showed a man with a star on his chest standing in front of a mountain, with the word "hero" written above in uneven letters. "Thank you, Lily," Caleb said gravely. "It is excellent work." After they left, Nora touched his arm. "You should hang that in your office." "Should I?" "Absolutely. A man should never forget why he wears a badge." Eleanor made a sound that might have been agreement, and both adults laughed. That evening, after the town had settled into its nighttime quiet, Caleb sat alone on the boarding house porch. The stars were emerging one by one, filling the sky with ancient light. He could hear Eleanor fussing somewhere inside, and Nora's voice singing softly to calm her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the compass. For the first time in months, he opened it. The brass case was still worn smooth, still inscribed with Eleanor's message on the lid. But the needle, which had spun uselessly for 14 years, was now pointing steadily north. It had been working properly ever since that night in the mining settlement, ever since he had decided to stop running and start living again. "It started working the night Eleanor was born," Nora said from behind him. She had come out silently, the baby finally asleep. "I noticed it when you opened it to check the time during the delivery." "I know. Do you understand why?" Caleb turned the compass over in his hands, feeling its familiar weight, reading the inscription that he knew by heart. I think I do. Eleanor, my Eleanor, she always said that home was not a place. It was a feeling, a sense of belonging somewhere, with someone. He closed the compass and put it away. I spent 14 years believing I had lost that forever. That home died with her and Rose, and all that was left for me was wandering in grief. But she was right. Home is not a place you return to. Home is a promise you keep. What promise? The promise to show up, to be present when someone needs you, to stand between the vulnerable and the violent, between the weak and the strong, to choose love over fear every single day, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. He looked at Nora, at the boarding house where a baby slept, at the town that had become his responsibility and his joy. I kept that promise. Finally, after all these years, and the compass started working again because I found my direction. Nora took his hand. Her grip was strong now, confident, nothing like the desperate clutch of a woman being beaten in the street 6 months ago. Eleanor, your Eleanor, would have been proud of you. I hope so. I know so. She leaned against his shoulder, warm and alive and present. And I think Rose would have loved her namesake. 3 years later, on a spring morning that smelled of wildflowers and fresh-turned earth, Caleb Mercer stood before the cemetery on the hill above Elkhorn. Beside him stood Nora, no longer Garrett but Mercer, his wife of 2 years. And between them, holding both their hands, stood Eleanor May, 3 years old and chattering constantly about everything she saw. They had come to visit the new grave marker that had been placed among the others. It bore 2 names, Eleanor Mercer, Rose Mercer, beloved wife and daughter, taken too soon, forever remembered. Below the names was an inscription that Caleb had chosen himself. They taught me what home really means. Papa, Eleanor May said, tugging at his hand, why is Mama crying? Because she is happy, sweetheart. That does not make sense. Caleb smiled down at his daughter, at this miracle who had been born in chaos and raised in love. It will when you are older. Sometimes we cry because we are grateful, because we remember people we loved, because we understand how lucky we are to be alive. He looked at the graves of his first family, at the stone that marked the ending of one chapter of his life. And then he looked at Nora and Eleanor May, at the living proof that new chapters could begin even after the worst endings. Are they in heaven, Papa? Eleanor asked, pointing at the headstone. The other Eleanor and Rose? I believe they are, sweetheart. And I believe they are watching over us, making sure we are happy and safe. Like guardian angels? Exactly like guardian angels. Eleanor considered this with the seriousness that only a 3-year-old can bring to questions of life and death. I am glad they are watching, she said finally, so they can see that you smile now. You did not used to smile in the old pictures. Caleb felt his throat tighten. He knelt down to be at eye level with his daughter. You are right. I did not used to smile. For a long time I forgot how. But then I met your mama, and then you came along, and I remembered. What did you remember? That love is stronger than grief, that hope is stronger than fear, and that home is not a place you go back to. He touched her cheek gently. Home is the people you choose to keep close, the promises you make and keep, the family you build with your own 2 hands. Eleanor hugged him, her small arms wrapping around his neck with fierce affection. I love you, Papa. I love you too, sweetheart, more than all the stars in the sky. They stayed at the cemetery for a while longer, telling stories and sharing memories. Then they walked back down to Elkhorn, where May Lynn had tea ready at her expanded shop, and Daniel wanted to show Caleb a new medical technique he had learned, and Silas was complaining good-naturedly about the price of flour. Life continued. Hope continued. The world kept turning. And Caleb Mercer, former bounty hunter, former hermit, current sheriff and husband and father, walked through his town with his family beside him and his compass finally pointing true north. The broken compass had found its direction, and so had he. The end.